this time of year creates what's called the December dilemma, simply because we're in competition with a major Christian holiday during this time. So there is a machlokas within the Reform movement. How do you respond to the December dilemma? Machlokas haposkim. Some say you got to build up Hanukkah because Hanukkah has to be, equal to what there. Others say no. Hanukkah is not as important as a Yom Tov, and you can't make it. I mean, they don't keep Yom Tov either, but can't keep Yom Tov. So some bedafka make a point that we have to de-emphasize Hanukkah, and others say we got to build up Hanukkah. But the truth of the matter is, Hanukkah is vaday not a Yom Tov. Of course, you're allowed to do malacha. But the messages of Hanukkah are extremely important. Hanukkah is a very, very beautiful Yom Tov, very meaningful Yom Tov, something that especially applies in times of assimilation and intermarriage, because those were the nisyonos that the Jewish people faced during that time. So, it's not a Yom Tov, but Hanukkah should be a very, very important zman for us. The word Hanukkah itself means dedication. And although it's referring to the dedication of the Beis HaMikdash, that's the particular context of the word, but it's also a time where we can rededicate ourselves, because every person is a Beis HaMikdash. That's the song, the famous words of the Sefer Charedim, Bilvavi Mishkan Evnech, I build a tabernacle, I build a dwelling place for Hashem in my heart. And this is a time of Chanukah HaMizbeach, we dedicate ourselves. Now, I want to go over some aspect of the history of it. I'm not going to probably finish it today either. And that's because, interestingly enough, the observances of Hanukkah have underwent different changes in the course of time. Sometimes one theme is emphasized, sometimes other themes are emphasized. And you'll see a back and forth. Sometimes it's the miracle of the candles. Sometimes it's the miracle of the victory. Sometimes it's the dedication of the Beis HaMikdash. And all of these things happened. All of these things were there, but different tekufais emphasize different things. So I'm going to start off with a lot of prehistory. Let's start off with the one of the most beloved songs of Hanukkah, and that is the song that we sing after we light candles, and that's the song that begins, Ma'os Sur. There's a standard Ashkenazi nigun for Ma'os Sur, which everybody knows, and then there are other nigunim as well. But if you look at Ma'os Sur is mainly not about Hanukkah, and I hope you understand this. First of all, keep in mind that Ma'os Sur is a poem that is an acrostic that spells the name of the otherwise anonymous author, and that's Mordechai. The author of Ma'os Sur is a man whose name was Mordechai. We know nothing else about him other than that. And that's you simply see because each Mordechai Chazak, in other words, Mem, Reish, Dalet, Chaf, Yud, and then the last stanza is Chasof, Siroa, Kachecha, expose your powerful holy arm, and that spells Chazak, Mordechai, may he be strong. Now, if you look at what Ma'os Sur is about, stanza number 1 is a general praise of Hashem for redeeming us from all of those who try to persecute us. That's very general. And it also has a prayer that may we be zocheh to see the rededication of the Beis HaMikdash, right? So that's general. Stanza number 2 is about the slavery in Mitzrayim, that God took us out of Mitzrayim. Stanza number 3 is about the exile of the Babylonians who destroyed the first Beis HaMikdash. So, Mitzrayim, Bavel. Stanza number 4 is about Persia and Haman. Stanza number 5 is about Yavan and Chanukah. It's the only one that's about the holiday of Chanukah. Stanza number 6 is asking Hashem to redeem us from the exile of Edom, of Esav, that we're still in. So it's very, very clear that the song Ma'os Sur is based on the concept of the 4 exiles. So we have to go back and understand this. The Torah says at the beginning of Bereshis, V'ha'aretz ha'isa sohu vavohu v'choshech al pnei sahom. The earth was, or the world was, before God started ordering things, toyu means astonishingly empty, vayu, confused and jumbled. Now keep in mind that already, toyu vayu inherently is a contradiction. Totally empty and totally jumbled and confused. V'choshech al pnei sahom, there was darkness on the face of the depths. V'ruach Elokim, and the Spirit of God, merachefes, was hovering, al pnei amayim, over the water. Where did the water come from, right? Okay, I mean, the world wasn't created yet, okay. Vayomer Elokim, and then creation begins. Vayomer Elokim, Yehi Or. Hashem says, let there be light. And there was light. Tayu vavayu chayshech al pnei tahom. And the Spirit of God said, let there be light. The Medrash Rabbah on this pasuk says that the Torah is alluding not only to what the situation was then, but things that are going to happen in our future. Tayu, emptiness, is a remez to the kingdom of Babylonia, which emptied the world of the Beis HaMikdash. They destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. They made a vacuum of God's presence in the world. That's Tayu. Tayu is Malchus Bavel. Vayu, confusion, is Persia, which the Megillah Esther says, when Haman decreed genocide on the Jewish people, it says the city of Shushan was confused. They didn't understand it. Even the Goyim didn't understand what was going on. Chayshech, darkness, is a remesh to Yavan, to Greece. Shechshichu es einei Yisrael. They darkened the eyes of Israel with all of their evil decrees. Al pnei tahom, the depths, that refers to the exile of Rome, which is so long. Even in the time of the Gemara, it was long, and we're still in that galus. It seems to never end. It's like dropping a coin down an ocean. You never hear it hitting the bottom. But the Spirit of God, which is Mashiach, is the Spirit of God, is hovering on the water. The water is a reference to tshuva. As it says in Eicha, Shifchi kamayim libech. Pour your heart to God like water. Nochach b'nei Hashem, as you face God. It's a famous Karl Nigun, right? But it says that to those words, Shifchi kamayim libech. Nochach b'nei Hashem. And through tshuva, the Spirit of Mashiach comes into the world. And what will then happen? V'yomer Elokim yehi or. There will be light in the world once again. So you see that the Medrash is telling me that the Daled Malchios, the four kingdoms, which are Bavel, Persia, Greece, and Rome, are woven into the very fabric of the creation story. That in the world there is a built-in imperfection that has to be rectified through tshuva, meaning God did not make the world perfect, so to speak. God made the world in which there will be defects, in which there will be deficiencies. And through the koach of tshuva, we can rectify that and bring light into the world in order out of chaos. Now, Mitzrayim is not mentioned here, but you have to understand, Mitzrayim, in a sense, is a pre-Galus Galus. Mitzrayim is before we became a nation in Eretz Yisrael. And in Mitzrayim, we will see, are the seeds of all of the later exiles. So Mitzrayim is the pre-Galus Galus, but the actual exiles of the Jewish nation after we came to Eretz Yisrael go in a specific order: Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. These are called the four kingdoms, or they're called the four exiles. Now, let's explain this a little bit, just in terms of understanding it. We say the fourth exile is the exile of Rome, and it's also called it's actually called the exile of Edom. Edom is Asaph. So the fourth exile is the exile of Asaph. So first of all, why is that Rome anyway? Why is Rome Asaph? So Chazal seem to have a Messiah that the Etruscans, now you may remember from middle school history, the Etruscans were actually the indigenous people that the Romans kind of conquered and dominated. But the Etruscans are actually said to be Edomites from Asaph. And ethnically, they intermingled with the Romans. And eventually, therefore, we actually attribute the rise of the Roman Empire to Asaph. So it's called the exile of Asaph. Okay, so that's fine. So that would at least allow us to identify Rome with Asaph. But the question becomes, why do we say we're still in the Roman exile? The Roman Empire is long gone. There is no Roman Empire. I mean, first of all, even modern Italy, which is anyway not a major country, are not the Romans. It's a different nation. So in what way, right, the Roman Empire eventually split into two halves. The Western Roman Empire, whose capital was Rome, and the Eastern Roman Empire, Constantinople, Istanbul today, but Turkey. That became the Byzantine Empire, right? So the dates are the Western Roman Empire, the official date that's given, although it's not clear exactly if those are exact dates, are 476 is the fall of the Western Roman Empire, and the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire by Islamic conquest is 1453. That's the fall of Constantinople. That's when that's when the Muslims took over. The Byzantine Empire was Christian because Constantine had converted the Roman Empire to Christianity. So either way, there's been no Roman Empire for quite a long time. So why do we talk about we're still in the Galus of Edom? So there are a few different answers that are given. Answer number one is that maybe the Edomites aren't around anymore, but the Galus they perpetrated is still here, meaning if Rome destroyed the second Beis HaMikdash, and Rome dispersed the Jewish people, and we still don't have a Beis HaMikdash, we are suffering the aftermath of Galus Edom, even if Edom isn't here. It makes a difference if they're here or not. The evil they put upon us, we are still suffering. That's answer number one. Answer number two is Rome gets identified with Western civilization. Now, it's true that the true architect of Western civilization is Greece. Greece developed the philosophy and the aesthetics. But Rome took it over, and Rome is the one that spread it throughout the world. So in a sense, Western civilization as a whole is said to be Roman in nature. Our alphabet is Roman, right? The English alphabet is the Roman alphabet and the like. Although we did move away from Roman numerals, made it a little simpler. We took the Arabic numerals, but the alphabet is Roman. A lot of secular law, even though in America, let's say it's based on English common law, but English common law itself has roots in Roman law. So in a sense, therefore, Western civilization is Rome, and therefore most Jews live under Western civilization. Ergo, we live under Asaph. And the third answer is that it is connected to Christianity, which in a way overlaps with the second answer, and that is, as we know, although Yeshua and his apostles lived in Eretz Israel, right? They lived in Eretz Israel, and Jesus died here, right? We know that. But nevertheless, we do know that Peter, who was Jewish, like most of the apostles were Jewish, Peter moved to Rome, and that became the capital of the Catholic Church, Vatican City, etc., Pope. And since the fate of the Jewish people has been inextricably bound up with Christianity, we've been living under the power of Christianity, we've been living under the threat of Christianity, we've been living under the Crusades and whatever it would be. So in a sense, even though Esav was not a Christian per se, but Rome became the seat of Christianity, and therefore that became the nature of the fourth Gullus, right? So we have three different reasons why we describe our Gullus as the Gullus of Edom. Number one, because the Churban they perpetrated hasn't been undone. Number two, because we live under the influence of Western civilization. And number three, we live under the influence of Christian culture. Now again, the Western civilization and the Christian culture actually overlap, but they are two different phenomena. One is the general culture of Rome, which it received from Greece, that spread to the secular world, and the other is the particular influence of Christianity. Be it as it may, that is why we describe ourselves as living in the exile of Rome, the Gullus of Edom. And that is why the last stanza of Mo's Sur does not talk about God redeeming us from it, because we haven't yet been redeemed. Unlike the other ones, it talks about a prayer, may God redeem us from the Gullus of Edom. Now, the notion of four Gullios is built in, as I said, in that pasuk in Bereshis, but more explicitly, it appears in the Nevuos of Daniel. Right, there is a book in Tanakh, the book of Daniel, and Daniel was not a prophet, as I said the other day, because he was not commanded to communicate his visions. Remember, a prophet is not someone that has visions. A prophet is someone who is given a commandment by God to communicate those visions. The Gemara in Megillah says, Beferish, Daniel is not a Navi. And yet, he had amazing, amazing visions. And let me give you two visions of Daniel and how they connect to the four kingdoms. Now, first of all, when did Daniel live? Daniel lived at the time of the Churban of the first Beis HaMikdash. That's why Daniel is a biblical figure. Daniel was brought to Bavel as a child, probably a teenager, like 13 or 14, before the Churban Beis HaMikdash. He was taken as a young man who was to be trained in royal service to Nebuchadnezzar. And in the book of Daniel is divided into two parts. The first 6 chapters of Daniel are biographical, and they tell the great stories, the very familiar stories, how Daniel refused to bow down to idols, Daniel refused to violate the laws of kashrus, and Daniel had 3 friends who were also great tzaddikim, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and they were thrown into a fiery furnace, and they survived. And Daniel is later thrown into a lion's den, and he survives. So the first 6 chapters of Daniel, which are around the time of the Churban Bayis Rishon, are about Mesiras Nefesh, devotion, emunah, etc. The last 6 chapters are a series of visions. They're not nevuos, because he was not told to tell them. Visions that he wrote down about future events. And one vision, it's quite scary, you can make a horror movie out of it, is he has a dream of a vision of a turbulent ocean in the middle of the night. And there's storms, and the water is turbulent and turbulent. And all of a sudden, monsters come out of the ocean. The first monster is a lion with wings. And the second monster is a bear. And the third monster is a leopard. So there's lion with wings, a lion, a bear, a leopard. And the next night, he has another dream, again with the ocean in the middle of the night. And a fearsome monster comes out that is much bigger than any of the other monsters. It has iron teeth, and it's not even identified as an animal. In other words, it's like some unknown creature. And this expresses the idea of the 4 kingdoms, that the lion is Nebuchadnezzar, and the bear is Persia. You might remember this from Gemara in Brachos. Gemara in Brachos is actually interpreting this pasuk, that Persia is called the bear because They eat like a bear, and they sleep like a bear, and they wander around restless like a bear in terms of conquering. The Gemara is interpreting the pasuk in Daniel. And the unimaginable monster with iron teeth is Rome. So Daniel has these visions about the four kingdoms. Now, earlier in the book, Daniel became prominent in Nebuchadnezzar's court the same way that Yosef became prominent, right? How does Yosef become famous, so to speak? Yosef interprets the dreams of Paro about the cows and the sheaves, that there'll be 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of famine. And it all happens, and Yosef becomes the great, great leader of Egypt. Daniel had a very similar story with Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, the Russia, has a dream of a huge, huge statue. This is Nebuchadnezzar's dream. The head of the statue is gold. The chest and the arms, so it's a statue of a human being. The chest and the arms are silver. The abdomen and the upper thighs are copper. The legs and the feet, the legs are iron. The feet are a mixture of clay and iron. And in this dream, a huge rock gets torn off a mountain and hits the statue. And the head collapses, and the middle part collapses, and the legs collapse. And Nebuchadnezzar wakes up and doesn't know what that dream represents. And Daniel interprets the dream. And once again, it's a reference to the four kingdoms, of which Nebuchadnezzar is the first. The gold head is Nebuchadnezzar. The chest and the arms that are silver are Persia. The abdomen and the upper leg are Greece, Yavan. The lower leg is Rome. And the feet, which are also iron mixed with clay. In fact, the expression in English, you have clay feet, right? You heard the expression? That means when someone doesn't really stand for anything and they can be easily knocked over. It's a reference that this was a statue with clay feet and the rock, knocked it over. It's taken from here. I'll talk about what the clay represents. We'll have to talk about this. This will be an answer to another question. But these are the two representations of the four Malchios in the book of Daniel. One is the statue that gets knocked over. That's Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And the other are the four fearsome animals that are in Daniel's vision. The idea of four Malchios. And only after we go through the four Malchios can Mashiach come. Mashiach cannot come. And that's what the stone represents God destroying the four Malchios and bringing redemption. So we've looked at three sources so far. We looked at in Bereshis, Haaretz Haisa Sayu Vavayu. We looked at Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and we looked at Daniel's vision. Okay, all of these are the four Malchios. So the Ibn Ezra asks a very, very good kasha. Now, the Ibn Ezra lived in the 11th century. The Ibn Ezra lived at a time when Islam was ruling over large parts of Europe. Remember, Islam, and later Islam will even expand further. They will defeat the Byzantine Empire. Right? The Islamic conquests were huge. They ruled over most of the settled world and certainly most of the Jewish population. So the Ibn Ezra asks the kasha, why do Chazal, on one hand, and even the book of Daniel, only count four Malchios that enslave us? What about Malchus Yishmael? What about the kingdom of Ishmael? The Arabs come from Ishmael. Now, Ishmael was not Muslim per se. And again, just to be sure we don't get confused, Muslim and Arab are not the same term. Islam is a religion. There are Muslims who are not Arabs. I don't just mean American crazy converts. That's not, but Iran, for example, Iran are Muslims, but they are not Arab. They don't come from that stock. And there are Arabs who are Christian, or whatever it would be. And certainly, Ishmael, Arabs existed before Muhammad. They were pagan. Arabs before Muhammad were largely pagan, and Muhammad did kiruv rechokim. Muhammad made them believe in God, monotheism, and the like. So I don't mean to say that Muslim and Arab are the same. Muslim and Arab are not the same, but it is true that the overwhelming majority of Muslims are in fact Ishmael, Arabs. So the Ibn Ezra asked the Kasha, why do Chazal and even Daniel, why do they ignore Malchus Ishmael? And in truth, you can even ask the Kasha today. Because on one hand, we are under, primarily Jews mainly live under Western civilization. There are not that many Jews in Arab countries, although there are some. On the other hand, we very much live under the stranglehold of Islamic fundamentalism and terrorism. Meaning, am I under Muslim rule? Well, technically I'm not under Muslim rule, but is my life affected by Muslim activity? 100%. Just remember October 7th, whatever it would be, and 9/11 and everything else in between. So what do you do about Malchus Yishmael? So because of this, the Ibn Ezra has a very unique approach to how you count the four kingdoms, which is absolutely not according to Chazal. You see, in the book of Daniel, it says there are these four kingdoms, but it doesn't say who they are. Just Chazal say, kingdom 1 is Bavel, kingdom 2 is Persia, kingdom 3 is Greece, kingdom 4 is Rome, and then is Mashiach. That's Chazal's interpretation. But in the book of Daniel, all you know is that there are 4. So look how the Ibn Ezra counts it. Very, very fascinating. The Ibn Ezra says, kingdom number 1 is Bavel, kingdom number 2 is Persia, kingdom number 3 is Greece, Rome. They count as one because culturally there was a continuum. Kingdom number 4 is Malchus Ishmael. So the way the Ibn Ezra gets Malchus Ishmael in is by counting it as kingdom number 4 and by combining Greece, Rome as a single continuity. Now again, this is what the Ibn Ezra says, but this is absolutely not what Chazal say. This is not what the Medrash says. Chazal absolutely only count Golus Edom. They do not count Golus Ishmael. So the answer that the Maharal gives is an interesting answer. Maharal gives the following answer. The Maharal says, we only count the Malchios who took away the Malchus of Am Yisrael, meaning to say, Bavel took away our Malchus over Eretz Yisrael, Persia continued it, Greece continued it, Rome continued it. Meaning, the Malchus they have was taken from us. Malchus Yishmael is their own entitlement, because Avram was given a bracha, right? Avram was given a bracha that even Yishmael shall become a mighty nation. And therefore, the Malchus of Yishmael, in spite of their evil, their many, many evil deeds, is not a stolen Malchus. It was a Malchus that they were given from the bracha that Hashem gave to Avram. In a way, that's why they're the most difficult enemy to fight, because they were given a divine blessing that the other nations were not necessarily given. Now, Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, which is a medrash, actually says that even though the last golus of the Jewish people will be golus Edom, that is our last golus, but golus Edom will be flavored with the awesome persecution of golus Yishmael. And that exactly describes our situation. We live under Western civilization. We live under Christian dominance. I don't mean in Israel in particular, but generally. That's the case. We don't live under Malchus Ishmael, or most of the Jews do not. But we live in a world that is affected in every possible way by Muslim terrorism, fundamentalism. So therefore, we don't count Ishmael as a separate gullus, because Ishmael is simply going to be an intensification of the suffering that we bear under Gullus Edom. It's like Gullus Edom version 2.0. And yeah.
Isn't there some commentators that also mention a gullus of the HaRav, and like a gullus coming from within Jews, like things like Zionism or other evil aspects?
That's true. Of course, that's a flaw. That's a flaw within Klal Yisrael, which is a separate issue. I'm not sure if we would call that a separate gullus, but we're referring now to the gullus of the external persecutors.
Are there commentators that refer to it as a gullus, though?
Well, not in terms of counting in terms of the four.
Right.
There may be other cheshbainis and the like. So I just want to say that Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer says that the intensification of Gullus Yishmael will be the most difficult of all the exiles that we will face. I got to be careful now, because I see that some Muslim groups pick up any statement I make and they kind of just cut it out and say, Arabs have a lot of whatever. Okay, I mean, I'm going to say it again. I've said it before and it's already been distorted. But the Svarim tell us that the reason why Gullus Yishmael is very, very difficult is Gullus Yishmael has certain spiritual kochos that our other enemies do not have. They come from Avram, first of all. Number two, they have the merit of circumcision, bris milah. Number three, they have the merit externally of modesty and tznius, although not really internally, but at least behaviorally on the externally, there is modesty and tznius in dress. And number four, they have a certain power of prayer, praying 5 times a day, that we only do on Yom Kippur. And even though these prayers are directed towards evil, they create a very difficult concept, a dark spiritual energy that can only be defeated by positive spiritual energy. You see, the koach of Esav is physical. That's what Yitzchak said. Hakol kol Yaakov. The voice is the voice of Yaakov. Torah, tefillah. Yodayim, brutal physical force, that's Esav. And the spiritual can always defeat the physical, at least ultimately, maybe not in the short run. But at some point, the Ruchani will overpower the physical. But Yishmael has spiritual strengths. Spiritual strengths are much harder to defeat unless your spiritual strength is greater. That is why Yishmael is such an implacable enemy. I mean, let's even look at this in a practical way. You know, after World War II, the United States entered a period that was known as the Cold War, that lasted for around 40 years. And there was an arms race. We were building a nuclear arsenal. The Soviet Union was building nuclear arsenal. And what kept the Cold War from becoming a hot war? A very interesting acronym called MAD. MAD stands for Mutual Assured Destruction. The theory, and this is the theory behind an arms race, is we know that Russia, or Soviet Union officially, is never going to bomb us, because we're then going to bomb them and they're going to be obliterated. So they're not going to bomb us because they know we're going to bomb them. Therefore, nobody's going to bomb anybody because they know that the second strike is going to wipe them out. And that was a rational calculation. I mean, we made that cheshbon and they made that cheshbon. And that's why we have to have all of this nuclear weapons to be sure that if they ever attack us, we'll give it to them even worse. MAD. Actually, MAD is a very good acronym. That was the Mishugas of the arms race. Now, that only works when you have a rational actor who doesn't want to be wiped out. I don't want to be wiped out. And even the Nazis were rational in that sense. Maybe not Hitler himself, who of course committed suicide, but there were plenty of Nazis who were Rishon Gemurim, but for the right bribery and the right deals, they let Jews go if you gave them money, gave them trucks, gave them whatever it would be. Because in an evil way, they were still rational decision makers. But when you have somebody who thinks that not only are they prepared to die, but they think it's a good idea to die, then how do you deter them? What can you do to prevent them? I mean, what's going to be? If Iraq or Iran would have nuclear weapons, they're not going to not bomb us because they're afraid of being destroyed. They love it. Bring on the apocalypse. Let's destroy everybody. And then we all go to heaven and so they think, and whatever you have in heaven, you have in heaven. In other words, there is no rational way you can protect yourself from an enemy who doesn't care if they die. Nothing works. So you have your army, you have your police, you have all of the people that we're grateful for. But how are you going to stop the guy who's driving a car who just decides to turn the car into the people that are waiting at the light rail station? What are you going to do? Not allow driving? In other words, in many, many ways, you can get very despondent because this is an enemy that there's literally nothing you can do. But here is the thing. The very fact that there's nothing you can do means only Hashem can help me. Ein lanu lehishayin ela avinu shebashamayim. So in many, many ways, now I trust in God because there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do. When there's something I can do, I got to start worrying. Gee, am I doing what I have to do? When there's nothing you can do, so some people might go crazy and commit suicide. But a Maimon says, if there's nothing I can do, it becomes God's job at this point. But Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer says, beferish, there is no physical way to truly vanquish Ishmael. No physical way, because Ishmael has spiritual zechuyas. Ishmael can only be vanquished in a ruchniistic way. And that's different than Edom. And we always need zechus, of course, but Edom, which is brutality and force, all right, so we could have a better army. But Yishmael, that is a certain ruchniistic zechus, we have to have that ruchniistic koyach. So Bekitzer, though, just to answer the immediate question, the reason why Yishmael is not mentioned as one of the four Malchias is because the evil that Yishmael will perpetrate on us in Acharis Hayamim will not be a separate Gullus. It'll be within the Miskeret. It'll be within the framework of Gullus Edom, but there'll be a certain intensification of Gullus Edom that will come from Yishmael. But the Gullus is still the Gullus of Edom, because we are still under Western civilization. We're primarily under Christian dominance and the like. Okay, so that's why we don't count Yishmael as a separate Gullus, even though Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer says the persecutions of Yishmael will be the worst of all. Yeah.
I've heard in Zohar it says that prior to Mashiach, Islam is gonna dominate or get a greater influence over the Western world. Are we sort of seeing that play itself out? That's exactly right.
And the Zohar also says that Yishmael will connect to Persia, Paras, which is very amazing. Yishmael in Iran. Persia is Iran, right? So there's going to be that connection. Okay, take care. We'll see you.
Thank you for listening to this Ohr Somayach production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.